We already talked about the basic appearance of objects in the previous chapters. This is the default white fill black stroke. So whenever you create an object, you will get these two attributes automatically applied, and the stroke size will be 1 point. This applies to every object. So there's a circle, there's a square, and we can also draw lines. Just simply using the line tool, I can draw a line as well. You will see that Illustrator always applies the same principle, so that black 1 point stroke on the outline of these shapes. In this video, I'm going to show you all the things that you need to know about the additional settings of strokes. First of all, let me select this circle and increase the size of the stroke. It's good to know that you can either select sizes from this drop down or use the up and down arrow, or of course you can type in a size as well. But I like to use a shortcut when I want to quickly increase the size. By holding down the shift key, clicking on these arrows, you can much faster increase the size because it's going to increase it by 10-point increments. When you change the color of the stroke, you can click here and pick a default swatch, or if you again shift click on this drop down, you actually get a different way of picking a color by using the color panel as a pop-up, in which you can pick a color based on the CMYK values that we use for print, or you can just sample a color from this area here at the bottom. And also you can switch to RGB, HSB, grayscale, or even sRGB modes. A quite interesting option also is the invert feature, with which you can invert the currently selected color. This way of picking a color, of course, applies to the fill color as well. So if I shift click on that, again, we will be able to sample easily. Or if I don't hold down the shift, I will get back to the normal selection of swatches. We can also get to additional options by either clicking here on the word stroke or finding the stroke panel here on the right. Now the stroke panel by default only shows the weight of the stroke, but if you open up the show options feature, that will actually show you exactly the same things that you would normally get up here as well. So let's walk through these now. We have an important feature called align stroke. By default, it is going to be aligned to the center, but you can align it to inside or outside of the outline of your shape. When it's set to center, it's going to be divided between inside and outside. So in my case, because it's 20 point, it will be 10 points inside, 10 points outside. There's another very useful feature called dashed line, which also helps to see how this centered alignment works. So once you turn on dashed line, you actually get a pattern on the stroke. And let me just move my screen slightly so we can see these options better. So the dash at the moment is set to 12 points. But if I click here and I use the up and down arrows on my keyboard, I can very quickly increase the dash. I can also press up and down arrows to much faster increase it. And let's say I want to use 30-point dashes, but then I would like to also make sure that the gaps are not the same size, because by default the dash and the gap will be exactly the same size, but once you add a gap size, you can customize that as well. So I just use the up and down arrows again to customize that. You can even add more dashes and gaps and create a more complex pattern, but for now I'm just going to keep it as is. Once you have a dashed line with gaps, you can also make use of the cap feature, and I'm going to switch to round cap and maybe increase the gap size just so we can see these round caps. So what happens is that the caps of the dashes will be rounded. The same thing would apply to the line here, and what I can do actually is to select that line, and using the eyedropper tool I can sample the same settings that I used on this circle. So once I click on it, you will see it will pick up both the fill color and the stroke with all its attributes. And of course, we can't see the fill because this is just a line. But if I do the same thing with this square here and use the eyedropper tool again. By the way, the shortcut for that is I, easy to remember. I can just click on it, and once again, it will be applied. Now, with the square, we also have another option which is very useful. Going back to the stroke settings, when you use dash line, you can use two different versions of that. You can align the dashes to the corners of the shape. That means it's going to adjust the length of the dashes, so it becomes a little bit more organized. Or we can go back to this one, where it's not really following the shape itself. So once again, the difference between the two ways of aligning the dashes around the shape. In case of the square, we can also use another useful option called corner. Now, at the moment, you can see here on the corners, we have sharp angles. But if I choose the round join, then these corners will be rounded. If I increase the weight of my stroke, it becomes even more visible. So that was the original corner, and this is the round corner. You could also use bevel join, which is going to trim them at the corner points. Let me just reduce the size of the stroke and set it back to round join. And let me select the line that we created. What I would like to do with this is to use arrowheads on it. That's another stroke setting that you can apply. Now you can decide what type of arrowhead you wish to use on each side. Let's just start with maybe something like this. And then on the other end, I would like to have an arrow like that. Now, as you can see, because my stroke weight is quite thick, these arrowheads are extremely big. That is because each of them has a scale value underneath them. So if you don't want to change the weight of your stroke, you can reduce the size or scale of these arrowheads. And once again, you can use the Shift key to make it smaller. Let's just make it, let's say 20% or maybe 30%. And now I can just type in the same thing here on the right, so 30, and press enter. Now that might be a little bit too small, so I'm going to increase it slightly. That can be maybe 50%. You can also decide whether you want to align the arrowheads at the end of your stroke or extend the arrow tip beyond the end of the path. Now for this instance, I'm going to turn off the dash line, and that way we get a solid line. There is also a useful option here. If you ever want to swap the beginning and end points, you just have to click on this icon here. So that's also very simple. And the great thing about lines is that you can always increase their length, and of course you can move each point in different directions. There is one last thing I would like to show you, and that is the width tool and the profile option, for which I'm going to create another shape. So let me just draw another ellipse, which is going to remember the colors that we used earlier, apart from all these special settings on the strokes. But I want to keep it as it is, and instead I am going to change the profile of this stroke. Now this is again something you can do from the stroke panel. Here at the bottom you will find the profiles. So let's see what happens if we choose the first one. This is going to vary the width of the stroke. Although it's set to 20 points, it's going to keep it at 20 at one point, but it will reduce it completely down to 0 on the other side of the shape. Let's just see what happens if we select another one, maybe this one here. Again, it's going to apply the profile along the stroke around this object. When we have a non-symmetrical profile, we can also flip it along the stroke, so to flip the direction of it. And of course, we can control the size of it with the weight. That still is the way that you can affect the size of the stroke. And you can make the profile even more custom if you switch back to uniform stroke and use a tool called the width tool. This is how it looks. And Shift W is the shortcut if you want to access it quickly. With this tool, you can just click and drag at a certain point to increase the size of the stroke, and maybe at another point, reduce the size of the stroke. Once again, I can do the same thing at another point, and so on and so forth. You can see how you can very quickly build up different widths at certain points along the shape. You can always go back to these points and even move them around along the shape, or you can select the endpoints and increase or decrease their size. If you double click on the center of a width point, you can also get the measurements of it. So if you want to copy the measurements from it, you can do that. Or you can also change the sides of it individually. So if I type in, let's say 12 on one of these sides, and I will click on OK, you will see now it increased only one side while keeping the other one the same. You can also do this with a shortcut. Holding down the Alt key, you can drag individual sides of the width instead of changing them all at the same time. So once again, here if I hold down Alt key, I can change it individually. While I have this shape selected, this width profile is actually already visible here in this preview, but it can also be saved by clicking on the Add to Profiles icon. That way, I will be able to use this later on. So for example, if I select this shape here and choose that profile that we saved, it will be applied to that. And even using the dashed lines, it will still work. And let me just show you one more example of the width tool. When I use the Start tool, and I will click here in the middle and drag it out and repeat the same thing on all of these points. And you will see how quickly we change the way this shape looks like. So applying this variable width on each edge individually could create already something like a flower. If I select this shape and copy it, I can go up to copy from the edit menu or Command C or Control C, and then remember Control F or Command F is to paste it back again. I can hold down the Shift key to make it smaller, and also hold down the Alt or Option key to still keep it centered while I'm resizing. That's another great shortcut to learn. So Alt held down or Option key held down will make sure that you resize and keep the object in the same center point. So resizing it once again, maybe slightly further down, I can have another part using the same technique, maybe rotate it around a bit, and you can already see what I mean, that it starts to look like a flower. So as you can see, there's many different techniques you can do with strokes, and we are definitely going to talk more about them once we get to the appearance panel that we already prepared here on the bottom right. That is something we will discuss in this chapter. But for now, in the next video, we are going to talk about color swatches.